Hey everyone, this is Andrew from SchmitzCustomArms.com. Today we are going to be doing a disassembly reassembly on the Ruger 1022 rifle. So let's get started. First we are going to start by removing the action screw. Make sure you have the safety in the safe position before removing the stock to clear the safety button. Now that the stock is removed, let's remove the bolt stop pin and the two receiver cross pins. Now that the pins are removed, the trigger group should easily be removed. Next, we will need to remove the bolt assembly and operating handle. To do this, the operating handle must be in the rear position. Next, lift up on the bolt to release the operating handle forward. Then simply flip the receiver over and the bolt will fall out. You can now remove the operating handle and recoil spring. Now that we have removed the bolt assembly, we will remove the barrel from the receiver. Simply remove the two barrel retaining screws. The barrel retainer should come off easily after these screws have been removed. Next, simply remove the barrel by pulling it straight out of the receiver. After removing the barrel from the action, we will now start the disassembly of the bolt. We will start this disassembly by removing the firing pin stop pin. Once that is removed, the firing pin can be removed by lifting it up and pulling it rearward. Remember to remove the firing pin rebound spring, which is loosely placed beneath the firing pin. Next, we will remove the extractor. To do this, depress the extractor spring and plunger with a punch. When it is depressed, the extractor should be able to be pulled by lifting straight up. After the extractor is removed, the plunger and spring can be removed. Be careful not to launch the plunger and spring when removing the extractor. Let's now start the disassembly of the trigger group. We start by releasing the hammer to the forward position. Make sure you prevent the hammer from releasing without resistance to prevent damage. Now we will remove the magazine latch pivot pin. After the pin has been removed, we will remove the magazine latch by pulling it out the bottom of the trigger group. After removing the latch, we will remove the magazine latch plunger and spring from the front of the trigger group. Next, we will remove the ejector pin. Once the pin is removed, the ejector can be removed through the top of the trigger group. At this time, you can also remove the bolt lock. Next, we will remove the hammer pivot pin. After removing this pin, the hammer, mainspring, hammer strut, and bolt lock spring can all be removed easily out the top of the trigger group. Next, we will remove the trigger pivot pin. Be aware that when you remove this pin, the sear can shoot out of the trigger group, and the sear spring may follow. The trigger assembly can now be removed out the top of the trigger group. Finally, remove the trigger plunger and spring. Next, we will remove the safety from the trigger group. First, we must rotate the safety upside down, which will cause the detent and spring to compress, allowing the safety to be pushed through the trigger group. Pay close attention to the safety detent and detent spring, as they can be launched from the trigger group during this process. We will start the reassembly of the trigger group by inserting the safety detent and detent spring into the hole in the trigger guard below the safety. Next, we will insert the safety upside down with the red fire indicator located on the left side of the trigger guard. Finally, depress the detent and push the safety through the trigger guard. Now we will reassemble the trigger and sear assembly. The sear will be oriented with the sear spring facing upward. We will then place the sear on top of the trigger and insert the sear spring, and then sandwich it in between the sear and the disconnector. Next, we will insert the trigger plunger and spring. Next, we will insert the trigger plunger and spring into the trigger guard. Once in place, we will insert the trigger assembly into the top of the trigger guard. Now, while keeping the assembly pressed together, insert a punch into the trigger pivot pinhole to help retain the trigger assembly. You may need to compress the trigger assembly once it is inside the trigger guard. Next, align the hole on the trigger guard, sear, and trigger. Now we will begin the construction of the hammer assembly. We will start by inserting the mainspring onto the hammer strut. Then we will place the hammer strut in the groove on the back of the hammer. Next, we'll place the bolt lock spring on the side of the hammer with the long bent arm of the spring oriented on the bottom of the hammer. Next, we insert the whole assembly into the trigger group with the strut placed in the rear of the trigger guard. Once it is in there, depress the trigger to help with aligning the holes of the hammer. Then insert the hammer pivot pin into its hole. Next, insert the ejector pin partially into the trigger guard. Then insert the bolt lock into the trigger guard so that the pin is going through the large oblong hole on the bolt lock. Next, insert the ejector onto the same pin. Note that when the ejector is placed into the trigger guard properly, the nose of the ejector will stick out of the top of the trigger guard. Next, push the ejector pin toward the other side of the trigger guard, but not all the way. Then push down the upper leg of the bolt lock spring located on the hammer. Then push down the upper leg of the bolt lock spring down to capture it with the ejector pin. Now we will insert the magazine latch plunger and spring into the front of the trigger guard. Next, we will insert the magazine latch into the bottom of the trigger guard and capture the latch plunger. The latch's toggle should be oriented towards the front of the trigger guard. Then insert the magazine latch pin into the trigger guard. Check to make sure the trigger group is functioning properly before continuing. Next, we will begin the reassembly of the bolt. First, we will begin by inserting the extractor spring and plunger into the extractor slot. Then depress the plunger and insert the extractor with the bottom leg pointed towards the inside of the bolt. Then press it into the slot until it falls into place. Next, we will flip it over and insert the firing pin rebound spring into the firing pin slot. Then slide the firing pin into the slot from the rear to the front of the bolt. Press it in until the holes align, then insert the firing pin stop pin to capture the firing pin. Note you should use a roll pin punch on this pin to avoid mushrooming the pin. Also, if the pin does not go in easily, make sure the holes are aligned. Now we will reinsert the barrel. Make sure the dovetail located on the bottom of the barrel is also on the bottom of the receiver. When it is in place, put the barrel retainer against the receiver and screw it in with the 2 retainer screws. If you want, you can use blue Loctite on these screws to help prevent them from walking out. Next, we will insert the operating handle and recoil spring into the receiver. Insert the recoil spring into the hole on the rear of the receiver. Then compress the recoil spring by pulling the operating handle toward the rear of the ejection port. Hold the handle in this position while inserting the bolt. The bolt should just fall onto the operating handle. If it doesn't, then check to see if the handle is canted. If it is not parallel to the slot on the top of the bolt, it will not mate up properly. Once the operating handle is in the bolt, we can release the bolt forward. Now that the bolt assembly is in the receiver, we can attach the trigger group to the receiver. We can do this by aligning the holes on the receiver with the corresponding holes on the trigger group. Then simply insert the 2 receiver cross pins and then insert the bolt stop pin on the upper end of the receiver. Now that the barreled action is assembled, we will insert it into the stock. Make sure the safety is in the safe position before installation. Once in the stock, tighten the takedown screw to lock the barreled receiver in place. Now that the firearm is completely reassembled, perform a systems check before using the gun. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button below. Please hit the subscribe button to see more videos like this. If there is a disassembly reassembly that you would like to see, please tell me in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching SchmitzCustomArms.com. See ya!